Our love affair with maps is as old as civilization itself. Each map tells its own story and hides its own secrets. Maps delight. They unsettle. They reveal deep truths, not just about where we come from, but about who we are. At the heart of the map is Jerusalem, and at its center, a tantalizing clue to what was probably the first act of the map makers. A tiny pinprick made 700 years ago, where a compass was used to trace the circular tower. From that tiny, ragged hole at its center spreads a map of amazing complexity. 1,000 written legends, 500 drawings of the cities and towns of the known world, and the monstrous races of the unknown world. Among them, the Essidones, eating the corpses of their parents, and the Skyopods, using one huge foot as a sunshade.
It was here, in the capital of Virginia, Williamsburg. It was one of the very few southern cities and much the most elegant and lively. We see it today almost exactly as it was in the 1770s, because history moved away and left it as a crumbling ghost town for a century and a half. Until in the 1920s, the idea occurred to a local clergyman and was subsidized by the Rockefellers to restore the original 18th century buildings that were still standing, and they were more than half the town, also to tear down over 450 later, uglier buildings and reconstruct the town as it was in its prime. Now, this was made possible by a map left by a meticulous French soldier. He was something of an amateur architect, and during the Revolutionary War, he walked all over the place and noted down the furnishings and the colors of the dyes on the walls, and measured not only the dimensions of the buildings, but the arrangements of the spaces in between. It's this which, to me at any rate, makes the town so fascinating. And I know that it's fashionable among intellectuals to decry Williamsburg as a museum. So it is, and a very fine one. At any rate, it's the only true picture I know of an 18th century town in which the blanks, the spaces between the old buildings, have a true 18th century look.
Napoleon's army controlled the heights, but he would now sacrifice his commanding position in a daring gambit to lure the Russians to attack his right flank. With a thin line of soldiers on his right, he ordered his men to abandon the heights and watched as enemy forces occupied it. Napoleon knew his man. The Tsar called a council of war and argued for an immediate attack.
We find the Greek and Roman layout of the city with streets, with channels and so on. Wonderful to have such a city plan. But we were looking for the lower city of the Bronze Age and the end of the lower city.
At first it seemed there was nothing here from the late Bronze Age. That later buildings had obliterated any remains. But then Kaufmann spotted one feature, so faint it could easily have been overlooked.
Then we got alerted by a fine line which alerted us. I just draw it here. It goes up and down, it goes inward and outwards, and there was a gate interruption, and it continued like this. So by this we had the idea we should excavate. What is this?
The excavation revealed a section of a deep ditch.
This magnificent ditch is cut into the rock, and we can follow it up 700 meters just around this hill crop.
Kaufmann believes it was designed to stop enemy chariots, and so marked the outer limit of the lower city. He dated remains in the ditch, and it was from the late Bronze Age.
Completed in 1682, Versailles was the crowning masterpiece of King Louis XIV. To put some distance between himself and his subjects, Louis XIV transplanted the capital of France to this small town 12 miles west of Paris, where he had built the most magnificent palace in all of Europe.
William positioned his soldiers in 3 divisions of men. The forces of Brittany were to his left. William and his Normans were in the center, and the French and Flemish were on his right flank. In each division, archers were in front. Then came infantry carrying swords and spears. His hit squads, the cavalry, were to the rear. Both flanks featured swamps and thick brush. William's only option would be a frontal assault uphill. The Saxon shield wall was less than 200 yards from his front line, and his target, King Harold, was only 300 yards away, protected by his private bodyguards, the Huscarls.